Okay, folks, so welcome to TESOL 2250. Unfortunately, the whole class is absent today, but I figure, well, I may as well try to make a video. We'll see how well this works. And I don't know if the camera is going to zoom in very well on some of the sentences, but let's try. And if not, then we'll go ahead and review some of this next week while we're in class. Okay, so today we're just going to very quickly review verb tense, and we're going to introduce aspect. And I'm going to do a few of the tree diagrams that were on the homework from this past week, just so we can get cemented in adding in tense and aspect into our verb status. So recall that when we are now expanding verb phrases, we're going to start adding a few things into our tree. And we're going to start adding tense and then aspect. Finally, we're going to add mood next week and expand our verb phrases, because as we see, verbs tell us a lot of information. They don't just tell us the action, but they tell us when the action happened and certain aspects about the action, such as the beginning or the middle or the end of the action. And they can also express mood, as we're going to see a little bit later, with respect to whether we're asking a question with the verb or we are expressing a hypothetical situation. So that altogether is the status of the verb. And recall, you can look at the slides from last week, it shows this as well. But remember that tense roughly equals time, although we saw it doesn't really equal real world time. And we know that mood is different purposes for communicating. So like making a statement or asking a question or issuing a command, that sort of thing. It's also, it can express possibility or necessity or obligation. So today we're going to focus on aspect. That is the part of the verb's action. And remember that we get aspect when we add an auxiliary verb, such as have in this situation. So just going back to tense for just a second, because there was one little thing I wanted to finish on tense. Tense, we talk about tense as being finite or infinite. So when you have a verb that inflects for tense, meaning it demonstrates tense or it shows it with a suffix, that means that it's finite. And that also means that it's bound by time, or it's bound by a set amount of time. So for example, if I have the sentence, she walked her dog, well, in this case, walked is what we call a finite verb, and it has tense because it tells us past tense. It happened in the past. If, however, we have the sentence, she has walked her dog, or she had walked her dog, well, what we remember from the previous slides is that tense always moves to the verb or auxiliary verb to the left. So has and had both are going to carry the tense. They're both going to inflect for tense. But walked, although it looks like past tense still, it's not. It's what we call a non-finite verb. And in particular, we call this the past participle because it looks like past tense. It happens to share the same form, but this is with no tense. We have no tense on this one. So you've got finite and you've got non-finite forms of the verb. And so as we add auxiliaries, we're going to start to see a lot more non-finite forms of the verb. So we're going to start to add the status of the main verb after a colon. And it's going to look like this. We're going to put MV for main verb, and then we're going to indicate as many of the status features as we have, such as tense. Every verb will always have tense in the main verb. And it may or may not have aspect, and it may or may not have mood. So we will have to indicate those too. And so we're going to practice doing that today. Okay, so I gave you a few homework trees to try and do the best you could on them, and we'll see how you did. One of the other trees I want to go over is the tree from quiz 4A from last week, and that was Elvira looked out the window. Now, I noticed that there was a mistake on the quiz I think that there was a VG verb that was marked as a VT. So both of you selected VG correctly, and the quiz marked you wrong. So I went back and fixed that. So you should see a couple extra points on each of your quizzes because of that. But let's look at that tree first. So let me just stop this. Oop. There we go. Boy, I don't know how good that video quality is going to be. Maybe I'll write it a little bigger. Let's try that. Okay, well, that might be about as good as it gets. Sorry about that. Okay, so our sentence here is Elvira looked out the window. Now, first thing we're always going to do is label the categories or parts of speech of each of our words. I start at the end. I'm going to start with window as a noun, the as a determiner, out as a preposition. Now, let's pause for a second because on my previous video, I talked about phrasal verbs. Now, these phrasal verbs, this might look like a phrasal verb to you, because you might hear somebody say, look out, as in to say, hey, I need to get your attention really fast. Something's about to hit you in the head. Okay, but that's not what this is saying here. This is not a phrasal verb. We are saying Elvira looked. Where did she look? Out the window. So in this case, look is going to be a VI. Okay, it's a VI. Now, I can end the sentence with this version of look. And this prepositional phrase, out the window, is just telling us where. It's functioning as an adverb of place. Finally, Elvira is a proper noun. So we're going to label that as prop in there. And so now we have all of our word categories. Now, as always, we apply our phrase structure rules, which you probably have in your notes already, but they're on the side of the wall here if you need to review them when you come to class again. I'm going to put first my noun. I know that that's going to make a noun phrase constituent at the very minimum, even by itself, but I see that I have a determiner before it, and I know determiner plus noun equals noun phrase. So I'll put those two things together first. Now I keep going to the left and I see, oh, I have a preposition here. If I have a preposition plus a noun phrase, then that's going to give me a prepositional phrase, PP. Now, this noun phrase here, let's rewrite that so we can see it. We know this preposition cannot be complete without this noun phrase. I can't just say, she looked out, she looks out something, the window. So this is going to be an object of the preposition. Now, let's not confuse that with a direct object. A direct object is also a noun phrase, but a direct object is only what you get when you have a transitive verb like a VT or a VC or a VG. Okay, so it's a necessary constituent for the verb. In this case, this is a necessary constituent for the preposition. So we're going to say object of the preposition. Okay, so remember, I asked the question, where did Elvira look? Out the window is the answer. So we can say this is functioning as an adverb of place, or whatever you want to call it, location. Okay, so now we know that the VI here, or whatever verb it is always going to be the head of our verb phrase. Move this for a second. So it's going to be the head of our verb phrase. We're going to go like that. And we're typically used to drawing a nice tall line to get to our VP predicate, right? Now, what we're going to add today is the status of the verb. So we're going to make a little break right here. And we're going to comment on the main verb. Now, the main verb includes, if there's just one verb, that will be it. But the main verb includes also additional auxiliaries as well. So if we start to add auxiliaries, that's all part of the main verb. So we're going to write MV, and then we're going to write tense. In this case, our tense is past. So we are commenting on the status now, and this is something new we need to add to our tree. So main verb past. Now, it's only past tense. There's no auxiliary verb coming before it, so we're done here with the status. So this is what we're adding today into our tree diagrams. Now let's connect the verb and all its friends, the prepositional phrase, and we get looked out the window for the VP predicate. Now all that's left to do is take our noun phrase subject and put that over Elvira, and then we get a sentence. Okay. So there is our sentence and our tree diagram with the verb status added in. And this is what I'm going to ask you to do on your trees as well. So let's look at a couple more, and then I'll let you figure out the rest of them on your own. This was the other sentence that I gave you. Let's see if the camera tracks. Does the camera track? Come on, camera. You can move. Oh, I don't know if it's doing it. Okay. Well, I guess I'm limited to this side of the board then. I guess I'll have to write it over on this side of the board. All right. That's fine. Look, you can pause the video if you need, and you can go back and relook at this tree. Oh, there it goes. It's a little bit quiet and a little delayed. Let's see. Will it track me? Come on. See if we can zoom in over here. I have never used this camera before. You can tell. Yeah, there we go. Okay, come on. A little closer. A little closer. A little closer. Okay. Well, this might be as good as it gets. So we'll have to listen very, very carefully and see if it will zoom in enough to where you can see. So the next sentence here is gardening clothes became fashionable during the 1980s. Now I'm going to draw this a little bigger because I see it's a little blurry on the video. Okay, so the sentence I have on the board, though it may not be very visible right now, is gardening clothes became fashionable during the 1980s. Okay, so I'm going to start from the end of my sentence once again, and I have 1980s at the end. Now, you might be a little bit confused as to what to do with this year. It seems like it's expressing time, right? And it could be an adverb for that reason. However, let's look at what's around it. We always have to look at the distribution. And we're going to notice we have a determiner, the, and that in terms of the forms of this word, we have what looks like a plural S suffix. And if that's the case, we know we have a noun. So don't forget to do your tests for parts of speech, all 3 tests. And that's what's going to tell you that we have a noun here. Now, we continue on. We're going to get to during. Now, this one we don't see very often, but this is actually in your prepositions list. Again, this is something that seems like an adverb because you think, well, it sounds like it's lasting a duration of time. However, the fact that we cannot leave this alone by itself is what should clue you in to the fact that this is a preposition. An adverb you could probably end a sentence with, whereas I cannot say gardening clothes became fashionable during. Okay, so during is a preposition for that reason. You cannot end a sentence with that. Okay, fashionable. Now, as we look at this, you might think, okay, well, I think fashionable is an adjective. Okay, you can say fashionable clothes, for example. And then we get to became. We get to became. Now, in this case, became is actually a VL. VL. Now, what we are saying is gardening clothes equal fashionable. Okay, gardening clothes equal fashionable. Now, it seems like it's not completely semantically vacuous because it does express a change over time. However, whether it was in the past or the present doesn't matter. We're saying they are equal to fashionable. So we're going to do clothes as a noun, and we're going to do gardening as an adjective. Here. Okay, so far so good. Now, if we have a VL, we know that this adjective is going to be the predicate adjective. So we can already know that we can add that to our tree. But I will start at the end because this is where the smallest constituents are. That's where I usually like to start anyway. Okay, so once again, determiner plus noun equals noun phrase, the 1980s. Put those two together. Oh, it's zooming back out. No, don't do that. Come back. Come back. Okay. All right, so you'll just have to do this on your own with me. I know the visual quality may not be all that great, but just try the best we can. Okay. We have a preposition during plus the noun phrase the 1980s. So that noun phrase is going to be the object of the preposition. And I'm going to put those two things together. I'm going to get a prepositional phrase. Okay. Now, once again, you may keep going to fashionable and you may think, oh, okay, maybe I can just put the prepositional phrase under fashionable. And then I would get fashionable during the 1980s. Well, remember, that's not a constituent. It doesn't answer any particular question. When did gardening clothes become something fashionable during the 1980s? That can't answer it. What did gardening clothes become fashionable during the 1980s? It still doesn't quite make sense. It looks like we've linked two constituents together erroneously here. Okay. So we remember that because we have a VL, the adjective that comes after it has to stand alone as the adjective phrase, predicate adjective, because it is answering the question, what did gardening clothes become? Remember that a predicate adjective is going to predicate on the subject here, gardening clothes. It's going to tell us more about gardening clothes. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Okay. It is incredibly difficult to teach tree diagrams virtually. And I did this for 2 years at Cal State San Marcos when we had COVID. Incredibly difficult. Somehow they all passed, I don't know. Okay, so we'll continue on. We have became as our VL, and we're going to draw a line up there to our VP predicate. But wait, there's something we need to add. What do we need to add? Well, let's put a little space here. Let's put a box so we don't forget it. We need to add the main verb. So just take a second. Add the main verb on your own. Pause the video, do whatever you need to do. And then I'm going to write it. So here it is, main verb, past. Once again, past. So far we've seen two past tense verbs, and all we have is past because there is no auxiliary to give us any more information about the verb status. Not yet. Okay, so we're going to connect our adjective, phrase, predicate, and adjective. I forgot to finish writing that. That's a necessary constituent to the VL. And we're going to connect the prepositional phrase. Now, you might want to think about, well, what can we add? We're saying this is definitely functioning as an adverb during the 1980s. Well, that sounds like a time period. So we're going to write that as an adverb of time. Adverb of time. Okay. All right. So now I have gardening clothes. Now I'm going to put adjective plus noun equals noun phrase, and this fills the entire noun phrase subject. So now we've got two words occupying the noun phrase subject. We'll expand our subjects a lot more in a few weeks. We'll start to do that. Put my noun phrase and my verb phrase together, I get a sentence at the top. Okay. I think most of that tree is on there. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, so what you're going to do is just take a minute and look at the trees that I gave you for week 5, the sentences I gave you for week 5, and just add the status for the rest of those. Take a few minutes and do that. Okay, so our sentences are: the convicted criminal turned in his accomplices. Leadville, Colorado is America's highest incorporated city. Tunisian determination made the people victorious after the war. So I'll check those and we'll see how we did on those in our next class when we come together again. Okay, so there are our homework tree sentences again. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about aspect. Okay. So we get aspect when we have auxiliary have and auxiliary be. Now, have and be auxiliary verbs indicate whether the action of the verb has completed or whether it is continuing. In other words, is there a definite endpoint to the verb, or whether we are focusing on the internal contents of the verb over time. So auxiliary verbs in general, another word for those are helping verbs. And they are called helping verbs because they add a little bit more to the actual verb. So let's take a look at this sentence here. My dad has cooked the turkey already. My dad has cooked the turkey already. In this case, we would say that we have auxiliary have. It's in present tense right now. We call this perfect aspect. So auxiliary have expresses perfect aspect. And we can also indicate, we can change the tense on the auxiliary because tense always shifts to the left. So this is our very first auxiliary that we read, and that's going to be the one that carries the tense. So we have here another similar sentence. My dad had cooked the turkey in the past. And, you can see that has and had differ by only their tense. Everything else about this sentence is the same. The first example, we have what's called present perfect because our auxiliary verb is in present tense. So it's present tense and it expresses perfect aspect. So what does perfect mean? Well, perfect means there's an endpoint to the verb that is specified. And it's kind of like, we take a little bow and we have a present and we've wrapped it up and we tie a little bow around it, right? It's perfect, okay? Now, if I have past perfect, the same thing is happening, except that we're talking about an event that started and ended in the past. With the case of present perfect, we're talking about an event that started maybe in the past, but it may continue into the present a little ways. Nevertheless, both of these have an endpoint specified. So has and had demonstrate perfect aspect. That is that the action is completed. Now, when we see this cooked, and I'm sorry, this is not really showing it very well. This arrow should be next to the other cooked. When we see this verb that's in italics, cooked, this is a non-finite form of the verb cook, meaning it has no tense. Again, looks like past tense, but it has no tense. This is something that we call a participle form. We call it a participle form. Now, participle forms are forms of verbs that can follow the auxiliary have and other auxiliaries that we're going to see. So I can say they have predicted the weather forecast. We have shaved. I have written a letter. They have sung. We have flown an airplane, and we have become smarter. In all of these instances, we see that have is occurring before these participle forms of verbs. Now, this particular type of participle is actually somewhat unpredictable. In some cases, we'll notice that it kind of looks like past tense, as in the case of predicted and shaved. But in other cases, it may have this kind of en ending as well, like written. In some other cases, it may have a vowel change in the middle of the word, as in sing and sung. It may be irregular or partially irregular, as in flown and become in this last instance. So in all of these cases, these are the same, they're called by a particular class of participles, but their forms are somewhat unpredictable. And this is often very challenging for students who are learning English as a second language, is trying to figure out exactly what the form of the participle should be. And in many cases, sometimes native English speakers don't even really know what the correct form of the participle should be. Let me give you an example. So let's say I have the verb swim. So I have the verb swim, and I asked you, I give you the sentence frame. I have blank 3 laps today in the pool. And I want you to use the verb swim correctly. Okay, so again, my sentence is I have blank 3 laps today in the pool, and the verb we want to use is swim. Now, go ahead and just take a minute and tell me what's the form of this word. Well, you may have said swam. I have swam 3 laps in the pool. That's how people oftentimes will express it. But actually, the correct participle form of this verb, swim, is actually swum. I have swum 3 laps today in the pool. But almost nobody says it that way. So you see, we oftentimes take irregular rules and we try to make them more like regular rules. Well, we see most of these participles kind of look like past tense. So we will typically replace a kind of strange looking participle with something that looks more like the past tense, swam, instead. Okay, but technically, if you're really strict about grammar, it's technically swum. So again, this is something that's really challenging for ESL students, and in many cases, even a native English speaker can't really explain the right participle. Okay, so these are participle forms that go along with auxiliary have. So we're always going to see the auxiliary have, and then we're going to see the verb after it in some sort of participle form. Now, it's important to note that this verb that follows have could be another auxiliary, or it could just be a regular verb, or what we call the central verb. Now, have and whatever verb or verbs follow it are all going to be what we call the main verb in our trees. So now we have auxiliary be. Now this is the other auxiliary verb that gives us aspect. We do not have aspect unless we have auxiliary have and auxiliary be. So auxiliary be indicates that the action is or was ongoing, and we're focusing on the internal structure of a verb over time. Whether that's in the past or present doesn't matter. But let's say I say, my dad is cooking the turkey right now. Now I have here, looks like the central verb here is cook, but I see this auxiliary verb is, and that's a form of be. Be is a highly irregular verb, but we just all know that that's a form of be, and we have to memorize that. I can also say if my dad was cooking the turkey when the guests arrived. Now, once again, in each of these examples, is or was demonstrate what we call progressive aspect. Progressive aspect means that the action is ongoing. And then anytime you have some version of be and then a verb after that, the verb after that will always be in another participle form, a different participle form, that ends in ing. And this one is a lot more regular than the one we saw with auxiliary have. Any verb after is or was or any form of be is going to have ing at the end of it. So that one's consistent. So I can say Dad is shaving. My friend was talking. We were becoming friends. I am driving. You are raking leaves. In all of these instances, we see auxiliary be in various forms. And then we have a verb after that that's going to have an ing on the end of it. So that one's pretty consistent. So this is aspect. And so what I would like for you to do is remember two things from today, two takeaways. That is, you can only have aspect if you have auxiliary be or auxiliary have. Auxiliary have indicates perfect aspect. Auxiliary be indicates progressive aspect. Now, when we add this to our trees, then it's going to also be expressed in the verb status, the main verb, as we see from the previous example. So let's go ahead and do one of those trees. And then the other two, I'm going to let you do on your own. Okay, so our first, let's see. Okay, I want to do number 2. My choir is singing on Sunday. My choir is singing on Sunday. That one's a shorter one. Okay, so the second sentence on that slide is my choir is singing on Sunday. All right, I'm gonna label all of my constituents, my parts of speech. Sunday here is a noun. And we know that at the minimum, all we need is a noun to get a noun phrase. So I'm just going to go ahead and write noun phrase above that. Come on, camera, let's see if it focuses. Let's see. Yeah, it's trying, it's moving. It's doing something, I don't know. Okay. On is a preposition. I'm going to add that there. And because I have just one word, Sunday, and it fills the whole noun phrase slot, I'm going to write object of the preposition on, and then I'm going to combine my noun phrase, object of the preposition, with the preposition, and I'm going to get a prepositional phrase. Okay, come back to me, camera. Maybe if I walk over here, it'll do that. Let's see. Come back to me. Oh well. Okay, so the next part of what we're going to do, there we go, that's better. The next part of what we're going to do is look at our verb here. Can I say my choir is singing, period? Well, yes, I can. When they're singing is just extra information. But because I can end a sentence like that, we can conclude that this is a VI. Singing is a VI, and we're going to mark it as such. Okay, so now we need to add a little more to our tree now. So we'll draw a nice tall line to the VP predicate. And then we're just going to erase a little section in the middle. I'll put a box there so I don't forget. Now I need to do the main verb. Okay, so now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You're going to notice that you have a main verb. You put it there. But you have this auxiliary verb, and we haven't dealt with auxiliaries yet. We got to figure out what to do with that. Now, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to write B, capital E. This here is a form of B. So we're going to say, okay, here's a form of B, and I recognize that this is not main verb B, but rather it is an auxiliary B. Now, remember, as we move up from the words themselves, we get more and more general with our categories. So we're very specific. We're saying this is a form of B. And furthermore, I continue going up to the next level, and I'm saying this is auxiliary B. Okay, so we're going to add two things here to our tree. Now, when you are dealing with auxiliaries, this is the only place where I would recommend you read from left to right. Everything else, when we're building our tree, we're reading from right to left. But when we're looking at auxiliaries, if you see an auxiliary, that's your clue that you need to read from left to right. Okay, that way you don't accidentally label it as a main verb. Now, I'm going to change a little bit because we're going to actually add quite a bit to our tree today. Well, actually, I'll keep this VI here for now. We'll talk about this next class. Okay. I just want to get the auxiliary in there first. Okay. So now this one is the only one that connects from left to right like this. We're looking at auxiliary B and we have main verb. I'm going to connect this auxiliary up to the main verb node. I'm saying both is and singing are all part of the main verb here. That's what I'm saying in this diagram. Now, we're going to look at the tense first. Whenever you express the status of the verb, you're always going to list the tense first. Now we have is. Is past or present? Well, looks like it's present. So we're going to put present, but now we're going to add something else. I have auxiliary be, and then I have a main verb right after it. Now, anytime I have auxiliary be and any verb after it, I know that auxiliary be gives me progressive aspect. So I'm going to indicate progressive aspect in my status. It's going to be PRES for present and PROG, progressive. So my main verb status is present progressive. I'm saying this is a present progressive verb. And if you're familiar with grammar, you know this is a present progressive verb. My choir is singing. It's happening ongoing right now. Or on Sunday in this case. So I will tell you this, get in the habit, if you start seeing auxiliary verbs, get in the habit of reading left to right for these. It will be very important once we start talking more about the participle forms next week. After this, now we've done our main verb status, we can connect our prepositional phrase. When are they singing? On Sunday. And I'll just say that's an adverb of time. Let's add that. Choir is a noun. My, we're going to say it's a determiner for right now. And then we put my and choir together, we get our noun phrase subject. Put noun phrase and verb phrase together and we get a sentence. So this is the important addition that we have added. Actually, we've got two additions. We have got the addition of the auxiliary verb be in this case, and also auxiliary have. So this is what we're going to add to our trees. We're going to add our auxiliary node, and then we're going to add the main verb status node to encompass all of our auxiliaries in our main verb. So now take a look at the sentences I'm leaving you with, plus the ones from this past week. Oops, not those ones. Well, yes, those ones. Got to finish those ones. Okay, so I want you to try this on your own. Marta has donated $500 to the ASPCA, and my choir has been singing on Sundays. And let's see how we do with that one. Okay, thanks everybody. Hope to see you all next week.